Now, having discussed the conventions of translating, let us return to the first example they give, comparing Isaiah to 2nd Nephi. And let us look at Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1. And this reads, Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of the nations. And if we look at this, we can see there are 5 italicized words. We have in the first line there, shall, be, and was. And then down near the end, where it says grievously afflict, and then her, by. Those 2 words are also italicized. So we have these 5 italicized words in Isaiah. Let us now look at 2nd Nephi. And 2nd Nephi states, Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterwards did more grievously afflict by the way of the Red Sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of the nations. So let us see those 5 words. Are they here? Those 5 italicized words. We have in the first line, we have shall, be, was. They're all there. But when we look down near the end, those last 2, we have the word by, but not the word her. So in this verse, only 4 of the 5 italicized words are reproduced in the Book of Mormon. Now, I think this is significant, and I will talk about that in just a second, but let us go back and read what the criticism is given in the CES letter that they mention regarding this verse. So let us take a look at that. This is what they say here. The above example, 2nd Nephi 19:1, dated in the Book of Mormon to be around 550 BC, quotes nearly verbatim from the 1611 translation of Isaiah 9:1, including the translator's italicized words. And I'm going to stop it right there because I just want to mention that, as I pointed out, it doesn't copy or quote verbatim from the King James Version, even the italicized words. It leaves that one word out. This change is suggestive that Joseph Smith was not using the King James Bible when he was translating the gold plates into the Book of Mormon, but that he had a separate source material which rendered a different translation and therefore needed a different wording than what the King James scholars had. If he was just copying the King James Bible, he would have followed the convention as I have laid out in quoting that translation, because it was the one that was known and used at the time, but he doesn't. He leaves out one of those translator words, one of those italicized words, because it is a more correct translation to do so. And that is, as I said, suggestive that he did in fact have a different source material from which he was translating that was more correct. Now let us read the rest of what they say here in the CES letter. It says, additionally, the Book of Mormon describes the sea as the Red Sea. The problem with this is that, and they list 3 problems here. A, Christ quoted Isaiah in Matthew 4:14 and 15, and did not mention the Red Sea. B, the Red Sea is not found in any source manuscripts. And C, the Red Sea is 250 miles away. So we will deal with those issues one at a time. Okay, so let us look at that first issue. It says that in Matthew chapter 4 verses 14 and 15, Christ quotes this Isaiah passage and does not mention the Red Sea. So let us quickly look up Matthew and verify this. So here we have Matthew chapter 4 verses 14 and 15, and they say, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. So we know this is quoting Isaiah because he says he's quoting Isaiah. Isaiah, the prophet, being the Greek form of Isaiah. And he does not use the word read in this. Now, one quick note that this is not Christ as they claim. This is Matthew quoting Isaiah. Matthew is saying that Christ's actions at this time and that he left Jerusalem and went to Galilee is a fulfillment of Isaiah's words. So it's not Christ quoting it, it's Matthew quoting it. But to the point of why doesn't this use the word read, see, instead of just see? Well, Matthew was quoting from the Greek Septuagint, which was the primary source that he would have had available. It was really the only edition of the Old Testament that most Jews would have been reading and been familiar with. And the Septuagint obviously had an error. So its translation was incorrect, but it was the only one that Matthew had available, and so he rendered it the way that it was in the translation he had, even though that translation was incorrect. The second issue, that of the source material not using the word read, see. The source material that we currently have available to us is obviously also in error, just as the Septuagint was for Matthew. Joseph Smith, on the other hand, is using better source material, in that he was using the gold plates that were preserved by God, and he was translating them through the power and inspiration of the Holy Spirit. His source material was correct. It had the right translation, while all source materials that we have in the modern day are wrong. They've got a wrong translation. They got an error in them that has been perpetuated throughout the years and was corrected by Joseph Smith. Now, this goes back to the 5 truths that I listed in my introduction. The truth number 5, that prophets speak for God and what they say is the truth and will of God on earth. And so that's how we know that these other manuscripts that we currently have are in error, because Joseph Smith was a prophet. Therefore, what he said was the correct translation is the correct translation, and it doesn't matter what these other manuscripts say because he is a prophet. And so we listen to him because he speaks the truth of God in the modern day. So now we come to the third issue that they raise, being that the Red Sea is 250 miles away. And the implication of this is that it is too far away for it to be what Isaiah is referencing. So to address this issue, we need to look at ancient geography a little bit. In the ancient Middle East, there were two major trade routes that connected Egypt to the Euphrates River in the Crescent Valley. The first of these highways was called the King's Highway, and it started around Heliopolis in Egypt, and it would cross east, going through the Sinai Peninsula to the northeastern tip of the Red Sea, what in the Bible is known as Ezion Geber. And from there, we would travel north, going along the eastern side of the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, and Galilee up to Damascus, just north of Galilee. And from there, it would cut to the northeast to join up with the Euphrates, the Euphrates River. And this was the King's Highway, and it's mentioned in the Bible. This road is mentioned when the Israelites try to cross through the land of the Edomites. They say that they will remain on the King's Highway, that they will not leave it, they just want to go through. And this is mentioned in Exodus chapter 20. In Exodus chapter 21, they again mention the King's Highway when they are trying to pass through the land of the Amorites. The other trade route would also begin somewhere around Heliopolis, but it would travel north to the Mediterranean, and then follow east and then north along the coast of the Mediterranean until it got around the city of Dor, at which point it would cut east to Damascus and join the King's Highway. So we have these two ancient trade routes. One's the King's Highway, one is the Coastal Road, or more appropriately called the Great North-South Road. In the modern day, this coastal road has come to be known as Via Maris, and that's Latin, which means by way of the sea. However, Via Maris is not an ancient name. It is simply the Latin translation of Isaiah 9:1. And later, in the Christian era, people took to calling this road Via Maris, believing that it is what Isaiah was referring to. But that is not the ancient name of this road. The road would have been either the Coastal Road or the Great North-South Road, and then you had the King's Highway. Now, to make a distinction here also, in the Bible, the Mediterranean Sea is never called the Mediterranean. It is only called the sea. That is its title, that is its name. It's just the sea. And most often, when you see just the sea, it means the Mediterranean. There are a few exceptions to this, such as in Genesis, especially before the flood, but a few more in Exodus. Moses, in his great psalm, refers to the Red Sea as the sea. But most often, it is the Mediterranean that is meant by the sea. This is why scholars have for a long time assumed that Isaiah was talking about this coastal road, or at least a section of this coastal road, because it says by way of the sea, which would have been a reference to the Mediterranean. So I decided to do a little research here, and I did a search on our church's website for the phrase, way of the sea. And this is the results that I got. The phrase, by way of the sea, appears only in Isaiah 9:1 and Matthew, who is quoting Isaiah. However, the phrase, by way of the Red Sea, does appear in the Bible multiple times. For instance, in Numbers 14:25, after Israel has refused to go into Canaan because they are scared of the Amorites and Amalekites that live there, the Lord commands them, as it says, tomorrow turn you and get you into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. Then later in Numbers 21, verse 4, they are told to go from Mount Hor by way of the Red Sea to compass Edom, meaning to go around Edom because they were denied passage through Edom. And if we look at the travels of the Israelites, we can see here when they went up into Canaan, or their first attempt to go into Canaan, they then come down to Ezion-Geber, which would be approximately the King's Highway, and compass Mount Edom up the King's Highway on the other side of the mountain to travel up. So by way of the Red Sea, as mentioned here, is following the King's Highway. And we can see this again later on in Deuteronomy, when they summarize their journeys, that they went into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. And later, that in order to go around Edom, they had to go by way of the Red Sea into the wilderness. And we see that their travels do match up to the King's Highway. The one time that they don't is at the beginning when they go down to Mount Sinai instead of just cutting across the Sinai Peninsula. And we read in Exodus that at this time, the description of this travel was through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. So we have by way of the Red Sea seems to refer to the King's Highway, or by the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea is referring to going down into the peninsula, down towards Mount Sinai itself. So we have these two trade routes, the coastal road, or that could be called by way of the sea, because the Mediterranean is the sea in the Bible. But we also have the King's Highway. And this is referenced in the Bible as by way of the Red Sea, because instead of going north to the Mediterranean, it cuts east to the Red Sea. Now, in Isaiah, it is generally agreed that this prophecy of Isaiah, or this statement of Isaiah about afflicting Zebulun and everything, refers to the Assyrian invasion of the northern kingdom. And we know that Assyria invaded the northern kingdom coming down the king's highway. They came down the king's highway to Damascus, laid siege to the city, sacked that city, and then from there they would conquer the rest of the northern kingdom. But then they would again travel down the king's highway in an attempt to conquer the southern kingdom of Judah. So they didn't come by way of the sea. Well, by way of the sea, they came by the way of the Red Sea. Because that's what the king's highway was called. It was by way of the Red Sea. So, in rendering this in the Book of Mormon as by way of the Red Sea, Joseph Smith is clarifying the route that Assyria would take in their invasion, which they did. They did not take the coastal road. They took the king's highway. Now, Joseph Smith was a prophet. He was given the correct translation. The original wording of Isaiah was had on those gold plates that he translated from. His source material was a better source material. And through the inspiration and guidance of God, he rendered a correct translation. But the very fact that he was able to alter this in such a way as to make it agree with actual historical facts that he did not know, and with the ancient geography that he did not know, shows that he was in fact working from an ancient source, an ancient document that he was translating. And this, taken with the fact that he removed or did not use one of the italicized words of the King James translators, shows clearly that the Book of Mormon is taken from an ancient source and not just copied from the Bible or made from Joseph's imagination. It is too closely aligned to history and geography that Joseph Smith could not have known at the time. So, in quick summary, why did Joseph Smith use the italicized words from the King James Bible? Because it is simply good translating practice to render what is already known and familiar, to keep it the same, and only change it when necessary to correct errors. In addition, the examples provided, specifically Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1, actually shows that Joseph Smith was working from an ancient source, and that the Book of Mormon is taken from an ancient record and is not the product of Joseph's imagination, nor is it a copying of the Bible. These things combined together to show that Joseph Smith was indeed a prophet of God, and that the Book of Mormon is, in fact, a divinely inspired book of Scripture. And that is my answer to the question given. If you like that, like, subscribe, and tune in for my next video.